In September 2002, when Charles Cullen was hired as a critical care nurse at New Jersey's Somerset Medical Center, the hospital knew nothing about his dark past. It didn't know that he'd been fired or forced to resign at a half a dozen hospitals, or that he'd been investigated by authorities for harming patients. And there was no reason to suspect that Cullen had murdered 5 patients at his last job. He was able to move from hospital to hospital without so much as a bad reference. Cullen would kill another 13 people at Somerset in 13 months and try and kill 3 more before 2 detectives, a state bureaucrat, and a female nurse finally connected the dots.
The story will continue in a moment.
You were under suspicion at St. Luke's. Yet you went off to Somerset and kept doing exactly the same things. And it looks like, to me, that you wanted to get caught.
I don't know.
You don't know?
Because, you know, you're right. I mean, I continued. But I was also careful. I was also deny any time anybody would have asked me.
It was the suspicious death of a Roman Catholic priest named Florian Gall that set in motion the events that would eventually expose Charles Cullen. Reverend Gall had died unexpectedly overnight while recovering from pneumonia, and the hospital discovered high levels of the heart drug digoxin in his blood. It was the second unexplained overdose in 2 weeks.
The blood levels were astronomical. They're way higher than you would ever shoot for by using the drug therapeutically.
Dr. Stephen Marcus is the director of New Jersey's Poison Control Center. He heard about the digoxin overdoses when a pharmacist at Somerset called his office asking for help with some dosage calculations. The pharmacist also confided that 2 more patients in the same unit had turned up with abnormally high levels of insulin.
What's going through your mind?
My number 1, 2, and 3 thought was that there was something malicious going on in the institution.
In July of 2003, Marcus set up an urgent conference call with the hospital's medical director, Dr. William Coors, and taped the conversation in which he told the hospital to notify the authorities.
This is a police matter. What we're wrestling with is, throwing the whole institution into chaos versus, responsibility to, protect patients from further harm. And we have been trying to investigate this to get some more information before we made any kind of rush to, judgment.
If there is somebody out there that is purposely doing this to individuals at your hospital, we have a legal obligation to report this.
Okay.
Somerset Medical Center would eventually notify authorities, but it would take them 3 long months.
Do you know how many patients died between those?
No, I don't know the number, but I do know that there were some patients that died in between that. Yeah.
5.
That we know of. But those 5 deaths I'll remember them the rest of my life. Sorry.
They didn't have to happen.
They should have been preventable, yes.
It was October before Somerset County detectives Tim Braun and Daniel Baldwin finally met with hospital officials. They were told about a half a dozen incidents in the critical care unit. No one used the word homicide.
They had dropped a couple names on us with regards to their own internal investigation that they claimed to have conducted for several months. And they did provide us 2 names in particular, but did not identify them as any type of suspect or anything like that.
One of them was Charles Cullen.
Yes. Correct.
The detectives ran a routine background check on Charles Cullen and discovered that he'd been arrested for stalking a female nurse and breaking into her apartment in Easton, Pennsylvania. The file there also contained a post-it note saying that the Pennsylvania State Police had called just a few weeks earlier asking similar questions. Detective Baldwin called the trooper who made the inquiry and hit pay dirt.
After speaking with the trooper, he informed me that his agency had conducted an investigation on Mr. Cullen with a suspicion that he was murdering patients in Pennsylvania as well. That he was using digoxin to murder patients.
And you found this out with making 2 phone calls?
Yes, basically.
That was it.
Do you think you had your man?
Yes.
Yes.
But the detectives knew that proving it would be difficult. A number of law enforcement agencies had tried and failed.
How helpful was the hospital in this investigation?
How helpful was the hospital? They were very helpful by answering court-issued subpoenas. That was the extent of their cooperation.
When the detectives asked to see computerized records from the automated drug dispensary and the critical care unit, they say the hospital told them that it wasn't possible because the drug dispensing machine only stored records for 30 days. They learned otherwise from the machine's manufacturer.
They lied to you.
Yes, they did.
They didn't want to give you records that turned out to be crucial to your investigation.
Yes, that's correct.
Do you think they tried to obstruct your investigation?
They didn't try to help it, that's for sure.
When the detectives informed Somerset that Charles Cullen was the target of their investigation, the hospital fired him, not for harming patients, for lying on his job application.
Did you get the sense at Somerset, for example, that any of your colleagues, any of the nurses, any of the doctors knew what was going on?
No, I mean, until, the day I was fired, I mean, nobody gave me any indication that anybody was suspicious. I mean, the weird thing about Somerset Hospital is that they were planning on firing me the night before. So they let me work one more shift, knowing that they were going to fire me the next day. So they let me work an additional shift with the suspicion that I had harmed patients, which is kind of a bizarre thing to do.
Did you harm anybody that night?
No.
With Cullen gone and the medical center uncooperative, detectives Braun and Baldwin decided they needed an ally inside the hospital to help them gather evidence to make their case. They decided to approach Amy Ridgway, a critical care nurse who worked with Cullen on the night shift and was his best friend at the hospital.
He was always early, always on time, crisp, and sat down and was very serious about getting to work.
Did you consider him to be a good nurse?
I did.
When the detectives first interviewed Ridgway, she was hostile and upset that Cullen had been fired. So they decided to show her the evidence that they had gathered. The Pyxis record showing Cullen's drug withdrawals from the dispensary and his real employment history.
What did you tell her? Do you remember?
I just told her that he was released from several facilities. There were allegations about him at other facilities for doing similar things that were going on at Somerset Medical Center. And I guess at that point she realized this couldn't be a coincidence.
And she offered to help?
Yes.
Danny pushed this piece of paper across the table to me. And it was the Pyxis printouts. And I was devastated. I knew he was murdering people.
How did you know that?
There were so many withdrawals of lethal medications. There's no reason except if you want to kill someone.
Were you angry?
I was sad for my patients. So many things were going through my mind. I was sad I didn't see it. I felt betrayed by my own intuition.
Amy Ridgway, who later persuaded Cullen to do the interview with us, spent days analyzing medical records for the detectives and schooled them on a computerized record system that would help reconstruct Cullen's activities on specific days. She recorded phone conversations with Cullen and wore a wire at a meeting in this restaurant. The same day, a newspaper article reported that he was being investigated for killing patients.
I said, I know you're guilty. I know. I know you did this. And yet I'm still here. I'll take you down to the station. We'll go together. And he changed. His face just changed.
And what did he say?
He said, I want to go down fighting. I want to go down fighting.
Cullen told us he suspected that the police were listening in.
I knew that Amy had helped the police. I strongly suspected that she was wired when she was asking me those questions. So, that didn't stop me having the same opinion of Amy, which is that she's a good nurse, that she's a caring nurse, and that she did it because she felt it was the right thing to do.
He was arrested right after that meeting on what police now admit was mostly circumstantial evidence. What they needed was a confession, but Cullen refused to say anything. So once again, the police turned to Amy Ridgway for help.
What did you say to get him to confess?
I wasn't very honest with him, and there's a part of me, I still feel guilty about that. I was manipulating him a bit. I told him the investigators were also looking at me, and how could he think that I wasn't somehow going to be implicated? I remember saying to him, "So who was your first victim? And was it a long time ago? Was it recent?" And he started to talk. He said it was a long time ago.
I believe it was with a medication to drop the blood pressure.
Cullen's formal confession with the detectives would last 7 hours.
Cardiac event.
We'll never know how many people Charlie Cullen killed.
Charles Graber spent 7 years investigating the case for his book, The Good Nurse.
It's very difficult going back. There's no paperwork. There are no bodies to exhume. He was working over 16 years. In St. Barnabas alone, he later told investigators he was ghosting 3 to 4 people a week. He didn't always know their outcomes.
How many do you think?
I would be very surprised, as would pretty much everyone I've spoken to with any knowledge of this case, if it was not in the hundreds, multiple hundreds.
You've been in here a while.
9 years.
You knew it was wrong
Yes, I did.
at the time.
At the time and later.
Are you sorry what you did?
Yes. But like I said, I don't know if I would have stopped.
Go to 60minutesovertime.com for a behind-the-scenes breakdown of 60 Minutes' first ever interview with a serial killer.